The sun rose blood-orange over Burkina Faso's dusty plains, casting long shadows across a landscape scarred by years of silent suffering. In the town of Yalgo, people whispered about the mine that had devoured their water, their trees, their health, and their hope. It stood like a fortress of greed, the Glencore regional headquarters, a gleaming billion-dollar concrete monolith surrounded by security fences and silence. To most, it was untouchable, until the morning Captain Ibrahim Traoré showed up at the gates. Wearing his signature red beret, dust still clinging to his boots from visiting a malnourished boy's grave the day before, Traoré didn't speak as he approached. Behind him, a convoy of military trucks rolled to a halt. Doctors, nurses, and volunteers stepped out. What happened next would go down in African history, because he wasn't there to negotiate. He was there to reclaim. The guards at the gates didn't raise their rifles. They had heard what happened last month when Traoré walked unarmed into a foreign-run cobalt mine and ordered it shut down after workers were caught chained underground. They remembered how he fed the workers before arresting the CEOs. They stepped aside. Inside the office, marble floors gleamed under the weight of betrayal. Rooms filled with air-conditioned silence, hushed meetings that had decided the fate of entire villages without ever stepping foot into them. At the top of the tower, Gregory Hargreaves, the Glencore regional CEO, sipped his imported espresso, watching dust storms on the horizon with the indifferent eye of a man too rich to feel. That indifference cracked when the doors burst open. Ibrahim Traoré? Gregory stood, unsure whether to laugh or panic. "We weren't expecting—" "You were warned," Traoré interrupted, his voice calm. 18 villages poisoned, children coughing blood, fields dead. You were told. Gregory tried to smirk, but the weight of Traoré's stare crushed the arrogance out of him. "What are you doing here? I'm turning this place into a hospital." What would you do if the place that once symbolized oppression suddenly became a symbol of healing? Across the Sahel, Traoré's rise had sent shockwaves, not because of violence, but because of justice. He was a soldier who carried books in his backpack, who cried openly when he visited a blind mother whose 2 sons had died digging gold for foreign profit, who told elders he wasn't there to rule, but to serve. His enemies mocked his compassion, called him naive, said the world ran on power, not pity, but they underestimated the pain of the people, and they forgot the power of memory because the village of Tenedo still remembered the day their school collapsed from illegal blasting. The mothers of Kaya still remembered the shallow graves their children were buried in, graves dug beside polluted rivers. They remembered the logos, the names, and always, at the top of the chain, Glencore. So when news broke that Traoré had entered the Glencore headquarters, they walked, thousands of them, from miles away, on foot, to witness history. By the time the sun reached its peak, the tower was surrounded by humanity. Inside, Gregory Hargreaves called every ambassador he could reach. "They've taken over my building," he shouted. "They're putting up cots and IV drips. What the hell is this?" A pause. Then a voice on the other end whispered, "You might want to leave the country." Traoré stood in the once pristine boardroom, watching volunteers set up makeshift beds. His medic unit prepared insulin injections for diabetic elders who had gone without for months. Outside, a mother wept as a nurse held her malnourished baby. Her first time seeing medical aid in years, Gregory, still refusing to believe this was real, confronted him. "You think this will fix things? A hospital doesn't erase economics." "No." Traoré replied, "But it can heal people. Have we forgotten that healing is more revolutionary than revenge?" The first real patient arrived by wheelbarrow, an old man with sun-leathered skin who hadn't walked in 6 years due to an untreated spinal injury from a collapsed tunnel. His grandson, barefoot and shaking, said only, "We were told someone good was here now." The silence that followed was holy. Traoré knelt beside the old man and helped lift him onto a clean hospital bed, a former Glencore conference table, repurposed with folded linens and surgical plastic. The old man's eyes filled with tears as the doctor unwrapped his wound. "This used to be the table where they decided our pain," the grandson whispered. Now it held his grandfather's healing. Back in Geneva, stock tickers blinked violently as Glencore shares plummeted. News outlets scrambled for statements. Some called it an illegal occupation, others called it the dawn of post-colonial justice. But in Yalgo, no one cared for headlines. They cared for clean water, reachable doctors, and children, with hope in their eyes. Gregory tried one final time to assert dominance. This building is under Swiss corporate ownership. Traoré simply handed him a folder. Inside were satellite images, land deeds, documents showing local chiefs had never approved the original lease. "This land," Traoré said, "belongs to the people. You're the trespasser." Gregory stared, hollow. For the first time in his life, a man richer than nations realized he was powerless. That night, power was cut to the building, but backup solar generators kicked in, donated by Pan-African engineers. The hallways glowed softly as IVs dripped life into children. Outside, fires crackled gently, while elders told stories under stars. Traoré sat alone on the roof, looking out at the town. He wasn't celebrating. He was mourning. Mourning the years. Lost. The children buried. The voices never heard. A soft voice interrupted. A little girl, maybe 7, with cornrows and large brown eyes. "Mama said you're the president," he smiled gently. "Only if people still want me to be." She looked around at the glowing building, the sleeping patients, the nurses who laughed while treating a boy's fever. "I want you to be." What? Makes a true leader, power or presence. The next morning, a drone flew overhead, filming the scene for international news. The headline would shake the world: Glencore headquarters converted to public hospital by African president. And beneath the video, thousands of comments from all over the globe flooded in. He's doing what no one else dared. They stole from Africa for centuries. He gave it back in one day. Finally, a real revolution, not in blood, but in healing. But far from the comments, far from the cameras, Traoré prepared for something deeper, because reclaiming a building is one thing. Reclaiming a nation's dignity, that was the real fight, and it had only just begun, because within 48 hours the calls started flooding in. From Paris, London, Zurich, ambassadors reached out to Traoré's office with veiled threats cloaked as diplomacy. "Captain Traoré," one envoy from the EU began, his voice oiled with formality, "we urge you to vacate the Glencore facility. This sets a dangerous precedent." "It sets the right one," Traoré replied, not looking up from the medical reports he was reviewing. "You didn't call when they polluted our rivers. You didn't call when children died from mercury in the mines, but now you call? We must protect corporate assets. Your assets were built on our graves." And with that he ended the call. Why does justice only feel urgent when the powerful are uncomfortable? Meanwhile, in the heart of the converted Glencore tower, something extraordinary was unfolding. The marble-floored offices were now surgery rooms. The executive suites turned maternity wards. One particular office, previously adorned with leather-bound legal books and a whiskey bar, now smelled of antiseptic and echoed with a baby's first cry. Dr. Aminata, a soft-spoken physician who had once fled the country due to threats from mining-backed militias, had returned. And today she delivered a baby boy, right where deals for land grabbing had once been signed. They named the child Hope. Outside, the streets filled daily with more people, not in protest, but in belief, in healing, in hunger for something true. Volunteers from neighboring countries arrived. Food trucks came from Ghana. Solar panels arrived from Nigeria. Her Senegalese music group offered to raise funds through benefit concerts. But with the rise of unity came the echo of anger. In Switzerland, Gregory Hargreaves was on live television, red-faced and sweating. "This is not liberation, it's theft." "That man is a dictator in camouflage." The anchor raised an eyebrow. "And what about the medical aid now being provided in that very building?" Gregory's voice cracked. "This is not how capitalism works." The anchor smiled. Maybe that's the point. While the hospital thrived on the ground, storm clouds brewed from above. Late one night, Traoré received a classified report. 3 Glencore executives had met with mercenaries in Abidjan. There were plans. not just to sue him in international courts, but to destabilize his government. Bribes, false media campaigns, even potential attempts to disrupt the power grid around the new hospital. Traoré's face hardened. He looked at the nurses sleeping in corners, patients recovering on stretchers, children drawing on paper for the first time. "I won't let them take this from us," he whispered. His top advisor, Colonel Diallo, nodded grimly. "We'll need to be ready, not just with soldiers, with truth." So they prepared, not with rifles but with revelation. The next morning, Traoré stood before the people outside the building. He held up a thick folder. "Inside this are internal Glencore communications," he announced. "Emails admitting water was poisoned. Memos on how to bribe our ministers. This is what they didn't want you to see." He opened them, page by page. On national TV, millions watched as words like acceptable death rate, collateral poverty, and contain local outrage filled their screens. You could hear the country inhale, and then it exploded. Not in violence, but in truth. Students printed the emails and passed them through villages. Elders read them aloud under trees. A famous rapper sampled the memos into a protest anthem that trended across West Africa. What happens when a people no longer fear the truth, but hunger for it? That night, Traoré met a woman who had been waiting 2 days to speak to him. Her name was Mariam, and she had once worked in the Glencore kitchens until her lungs gave out from the chemical vapors. They let her go without insurance, without apology. She now walked with a limp, dragging her oxygen tank behind her. "I don't want revenge," she told him. "I just want my daughter to breathe clean air." He took her hand. "She will." At that moment, it didn't matter if they came with lawyers or mercenaries. They had already lost the one thing Traoré had given back to the people. Belief, but belief, as powerful as it is, can provoke those who profit from despair. And they struck. Back on a hot, dry night, when even the stars refused to blink, a small explosion rocked the west wing of the hospital. No one was killed, but the neonatal ward was blackened with smoke. Newborns had to be rushed out into the street. Panic spread. Within minutes, Traoré was on the scene. His jacket soaked with sweat, he helped carry oxygen tanks down the stairs. His hands, once made to hold rifles, now cradled crying infants. The fire was small. The fear it ignited was not. Traoré stood before the people once more, soot on his forehead, his voice ragged. They thought they could burn our healing. But let them hear this. He raised a child high above his head. "You can't bomb a heartbeat. You can't kill what is already born inside us." The crowd roared. What makes a revolution unstoppable? Guns or the will to heal? In response, African leaders began to speak. The president of Mali tweeted, "We stand with Burkina Faso. Africa will no longer be a mine. It will be a miracle." This time Traoré didn't send soldiers. He sent teachers, law students, journalists, volunteers with maps and public records. They arrived in the villages with one mission: to uncover the truth behind every stolen acre, to teach locals about the contracts signed without their knowledge, to show them their names weren't on the deeds, but their histories were written in every tree, every stream, every corner of cracked earth. And slowly, something unexpected happened. The people began to fight back, not with fists, but with facts. One grandmother held up a contract at a public gathering and shouted, "This paper says I'm poor, but I've fed 6 generations from this land." A young man read from a colonial-era map and pointed, "Even the French didn't take this land. Why should they?" Across villages, murals of Traoré went up, painted not with guns but with stethoscopes and shovels. But while the people rose, the corporations retaliated. Legal threats poured in from international courts, frozen accounts, smear campaigns. Western media outlets labeled Traoré a populist strongman. Foreign analysts claimed he was risking stability for spectacle. Even the African Union issued a cautious statement. Burkina Faso must respect property rights while honoring its national interests. Traoré read it in silence. Property rights. What about people's rights? One morning, a schoolteacher named Issa arrived at the hospital-turned-headquarters, holding his daughter's hand. "She drew something for you," Issa said. The girl, no older than 6, handed Traoré a drawing, a small house, a tree, and 3 stick figures smiling. "This is our land," she said. "My mama says it's ours even if they take it." Traoré knelt and gently folded the paper into his pocket. That night he addressed the nation again. He didn't read from a speech. He stood in front of a chalkboard, and he taught the people how contracts are forged, how development often means displacement, how international investors label fertile soil underutilized to justify buying it, and how, in their eyes, if you don't hold a printed title, you don't exist. "But we do exist," he said softly. "Our sweat exists, our dead exist, our food exists, our children exist. Can a land truly belong to someone if its heartbeat comes from someone else?" The next day, elders marched with walking sticks through fields marked for destruction. Behind them came mothers with babies, then fathers with tools, then students with signs that read, "This land is not for sale." They stood in front of the bulldozers, and they didn't move. By noon, the foreign crew packed up and left. No one wanted to run over grandmothers on camera, and in that moment something became clear. This was no longer about Traoré. It was about all of them. But peace never holds long when profit is interrupted. A week later, masked gunmen attacked a village known for resisting land seizure. 3 were killed, homes torched, grain stores destroyed. When the news reached Traoré, he drove through the night. No convoy, no security detail. He found the survivors sitting beneath a half-burned tree. Artists, teachers, even exiled journalists returned. Donations poured in. A famed Kenyan architect offered to redesign the entire hospital using sustainable mud brick domes rooted in traditional Sahelian design. And through it all, Traoré never once gave a speech about wealth, only about dignity, because he understood something deeper. They hadn't just stolen gold, they had stolen worth, and now worth was returning. Inside the hospital, a boy named Kofi was learning how to walk again after years in a wheelchair, his legs atrophied from mercury poisoning in the mining town of Tuguri. His mother sat weeping as nurses cheered. The nurse whispered to her, "He's going to walk out of this building someday." And the mother whispered back, "And into a world my father never lived to see." In Geneva, things looked very different. Glencore's board had dissolved into chaos. One by one, whistleblowers emerged, shareholders pulled out, and as images of the burned ward surfaced, followed by Traoré holding a baby in the smoke, the world changed sides. A CNN anchor summed it up in one haunting sentence. A child was nearly burned alive, and still he chose to build, not bomb. When the world sees courage wrapped in compassion, how can it look away? By the end of the week, Traoré stood again on the rooftop, this time not alone. Beside him stood Mariam, Dr. Aminata, young Kofi, and the baby named Hope. Below them, a sea of people, silent, waiting. "We've turned a monument to greed into a sanctuary of healing," Traoré said. "But this is only the beginning. This isn't just a building, it's a promise." He paused. "Next, we return the land. Then the schools. Then the water." And the people answered in one voice, "All of it." As the sun sank behind the hospital that once housed exploitation, now glowing with light and life, Traoré closed his eyes. Tomorrow would bring new threats, new challenges. He knew it wouldn't end easily. But tonight, just for this moment, Africa had taken back a piece of itself, and it was sacred, but sacred things are always under threat. 3 weeks after the Glencore Tower became a hospital, a new front in the battle opened. This time in the soil itself. Traoré received word that a multinational consortium had purchased 50,000 hectares of farmland in the northern province of Loroum, land where generations of families had lived, tilled, and buried their dead. Now, bulldozers had arrived with flags from Canada and Australia, the people never informed, their ancestors' graves marked for removal, their water sources already fenced, and the deal signed years ago, by ministers long gone, their pockets full, their names erased. Traoré stood in the red dirt with village elders and children, the wind carrying dust and anger in equal measure. He picked up a handful of soil, let it run through his fingers, "They want to take this too," he said quietly. The village chief, a frail man named Baba, placed a trembling hand on Traoré's shoulder. "Then we must show them it was never theirs. What do we owe the ground our grandparents are buried in?" He didn't give a speech. He sat down and listened. One woman with blood on her scarf said, "They came because we said no." Traoré looked at her, "And we will keep saying it." The next morning, a press conference. Traoré held up the charred remains of a child's shoe. "Is this your investment?" he asked the world. "Is this your development?" He announced the immediate seizure and return of all lands unlawfully claimed under the previous regimes. He invited international observers to watch, but not to intervene. "We are not against the world," he said, "but we are no longer beneath it." Some in the elite panicked. Bankers left the country. Former ministers tried to flee. A few begged for asylum in Europe, but in the heart of Burkina Faso, a celebration began. Not loud, not flashy, just a quiet rebuilding, children planting trees in burned fields, farmers lifting shovels where barbed wire once lay, schoolgirls carrying baskets of seeds where machines used to roll, and in the hospital, Mariam, the woman with the oxygen tank, stood unaided for the first time in years. "They can't breathe for me anymore," she whispered. "But they can't take my breath either." Across Africa, Traoré's movement sparked a wildfire. In Niger, villagers peacefully blocked a uranium pipeline. In Congo, doctors held free clinics beside shuttered mines. In Kenya, students marched holding signs, "We want a hospital, not a headquarters." And in Burkina Faso, the word changed from resistance to restoration. But there was still one final reckoning. Gregory Hargreaves, still hiding in Switzerland, had filed a motion in the World Trade Court accusing Traoré of economic terrorism. Sommeil, case was televised. Traoré agreed to speak. He wore no suit, only his uniform and red beret. He walked into the chamber, not with lawyers, but with Dr. Aminata, young Kofi, and the girl who drew the house. He said nothing for a long time. Then, finally, he placed the drawing on the table. "This is what we're fighting for," he said. "Not shares, not stocks, not your GDP." He looked each delegate in the eye. "We're fighting for a home. When all the numbers fade, what's left to measure a nation's worth?" The room went silent, and for once, silence was a victory. The motion was dropped, no sanctions filed, because even the coldest systems can't hold power over truth forever. Back in Burkina Faso, the Glencore tower-turned-hospital had grown. It now had a library, a maternity garden, a wall of names honoring those lost in the mines, and above the entrance, in bold letters, "This was once greed, now it is grace." Traoré stood before it one evening as the sun bled into the horizon. Colonel Diallo approached. "They say the world is watching," Diallo said. Traoré smiled faintly. "Good, let them learn. Good, let them learn." And they did. But the lesson they received wasn't one found in books or spreadsheets. It was in the silence after the explosions, in the laughter of children where cries once echoed, in the slow turning of a nation that refused to be swallowed anymore. From the rooftops of Ouagadougou to the dusty lanes of Kaya, people began to rebuild what was stolen, not just with bricks but with memory. The hospital, once the emblem of foreign wealth, was now a landmark of African healing. Farmers walked for days to reach it. Mothers sang lullabies in its hallways. And outside, a new mural appeared. It showed the tower in flames, not burning but rising like a phoenix. Underneath it, the words, "And what will it be tomorrow?" Traoré didn't answer at first. Then he looked out across the lights of the city, twinkling like stars fallen to earth. It'll be the beginning. The story didn't end there, because soon came a letter, written by a 12-year-old girl from the south, addressed simply to Captain Traoré, the one who gave us back our name. She wrote, "My papa says we used to be nothing, but now he smiles when he walks. He says we are something now. I want to be a nurse. Maybe I will work in the hospital one day. Thank you for showing him he could be proud." Traoré read it aloud at a small village school. No cameras, no officials, just him and the children. He folded it, placed it in his coat pocket beside the old drawing. Then he turned to the class and asked, "Who else wants to help build the next hospital? Every hand went up, even the shy ones, even the broken ones, especially. The broken ones. Soon other nations began sending delegations, not to control, but to learn. Architects from Brazil toured the mud-brick domes. Economists from Vietnam asked about land reform. Journalists from the Philippines documented how a nation healed by telling the truth, not hiding it. And Traoré welcomed them all, not as a ruler, but as a student. Because he knew the only way to keep the movement alive was to keep listening. In the final weeks of the year, something happened no one expected. The former site of the second-largest gold mine, once controlled by a foreign conglomerate, was returned to the local government. But, instead of reopening it, Traoré made a different announcement. That land would be transformed into the University of African Futures, a school for leaders, engineers, artists and healers, funded not by gold, but by hope. And as construction began, a group of children were seen planting saplings along the path leading to the entrance. One child looked up at the sign and asked, "What's a university?" The teacher smiled. "It's where you go to learn how to protect what's yours." What does it say about a people when they choose books over gold, healing over history, and gardens over graveyards? On the one-year anniversary of the hospital, opening a celebration was held. No fireworks, just music, laughter, storytelling around fires, and in the center of it all, Traoré stood beside a statue, a new one, unveiled that night, not of himself, but of Mariam. Standing tall, her oxygen tank, carved in stone, one hand raised toward the sky, the plaque read, "She couldn't breathe, but she helped the rest of us learn how." And around that statue, thousands of people gathered, not to remember suffering, but to honor survival. As the night drew to a close, Traoré looked to the stars. He whispered to no one in particular, "We are no longer what they called us, not poor, not broken, not forgotten." He turned to the crowd. "We are the people who turned a mine into a hospital, and a hospital into our home." The music swelled. Children danced. A baby named Hope took his first steps outside the maternity ward, holding his mother's finger. And somewhere, far beyond Burkina Faso, a ripple reached another place, another soul, another forgotten corner of the earth, reminding them, it can be done.